The evening had begun like many others in the world of the elite. Polished marble floors, soft golden light from chandeliers, and the low hum of ocean waves whispering beyond the windows of Mar-a-Lago. It was supposed to be just another private dinner. Elon Musk sat across from Donald Trump, two of the world's most unpredictable minds meeting in quiet luxury. The topics of conversation were grand in scale: artificial intelligence, space colonization, political futures. The kind of dialogue that filled rooms with ambition and strategy. But what none of them expected was that the most earth-shaking moment would come not from the two titans, but from a boy. XAA-12, better known simply as X, sat between his father and Trump. He was quiet, thoughtful, his sharp blue eyes always scanning, always calculating. He wasn't supposed to be there, but Elon had brought him anyway. When asked why, he had simply said he wanted to come. As the men discussed the future of nations and planets, X sat silently, absorbing every word. Then, without warning, he spoke. "Mr. Trump," he said, his voice soft but clear. Trump paused, mid-sentence. Musk turned to his son, curious. "Are you afraid of being forgotten?" Silence. Total, complete, unexpected silence. The question, simple in structure but loaded with weight, cut through the room like a blade through still air. For a moment, Trump's legendary bravado vanished. His face didn't contort in mockery or defiance. Instead, it froze, just for a second. A flicker, barely noticeable to anyone else. But Elon saw it. He had known Trump long enough to recognize the rarest of expressions on the man's face: doubt. Trump finally laughed, deflecting with his usual charm. "Kid, I've got my name on more buildings than you've had birthdays. They'll be talking about me long after we're all gone." But X didn't blink. "That's not what I mean." And in that instant, the entire energy in the room changed. Elon felt it like a shift in gravity. The glitz of the setting faded. The titles, the achievements, the power. They all shrunk in the shadow of a boy's question. Not because of disrespect, but because of honesty. X had asked not from a place of challenge, but from curiosity, from truth. What followed wasn't a debate or a defense. It was a crack in the armor. Trump, the man who always had a comeback, was caught thinking. And for Musk, watching this unfold, it wasn't just fascinating, it was moving. Because in that moment, his son did something extraordinary. He peeled back the surface of greatness and touched the humanity underneath. He reminded two of the most influential men on Earth that no legacy is complete without reflection, and no success is truly eternal unless it is understood. And all it took was one question. Trump leaned back in his chair, the ice in his whiskey clinking softly as he swirled the glass. The question from earlier, "Are you afraid of being forgotten?" still lingered in the air, like the scent of salt drifting in from the ocean. He had answered it in the way most expected, with confidence, bravado, a boast about names on buildings and global recognition. But the boy hadn't been satisfied. And now, X, small in stature but impossibly composed, tilted his head and looked at Trump again. There was no disrespect in his gaze, only curiosity, sharp and sincere. "When people talk about you 100 years from now," X said, voice steady, "will they just remember your name, or will they remember who you really were?" Trump stilled. It was a question he hadn't prepared for. Not from an opponent, not from the press, and certainly not from a child. And yet it landed deeper than most challenges he'd ever faced, because it wasn't wrapped in judgment. It was wrapped in wonder, and maybe that was why it hurt. Elon watched closely. He wasn't saying a word, but his mind was racing. He had asked himself that question more times than he could admit. What was it that people remembered? The vision, the innovation, or the moments of being human? Trump broke eye contact for the first time that evening. He looked out the window toward the waves, their rhythm unchanging, indifferent to empires and egos. He tapped his fingers against the table, a habitual gesture, not just of thought, but of subtle discomfort. "I've built things," he said at last, his voice quieter than before. Hotels, towers, resorts, a presidency. X nodded, his expression unchanged. And when those things are gone? Trump looked back at him. They won't be. My name is on them. X's reply came softly, but carried the force of truth. But names fade. The silence that followed was thicker than any speech. It wasn't about politics anymore. It wasn't about money. It was about permanence, about meaning. Trump's jaw flexed, not in anger, but in reflection. For decades, he had believed that legacy was built in stone, in gold-plated signage and televised speeches. But now, faced with a boy who asked questions most grown men ran from, he was beginning to feel the truth settle in like cold air. Impact isn't measured in monuments. It's measured in memory. Musk's eyes didn't leave Trump. He saw it in his old rival's face, that flicker of realization. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't even fear. It was the beginning of something rarer, understanding. You think people remember Washington because his name is on a dollar bill? Trump said eventually, his voice calmer, more grounded. Number. They remember how he made them feel. X didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. The quiet understanding that the legacy that lasts is not the one you build, but the one you leave behind in the hearts of others. The ocean murmured in the distance, steady and timeless. The flickering candlelight between the three cast long, dancing shadows across the polished table. But none of them noticed anymore. Something had shifted. The grandeur of politics, business, and power had faded into the background. Now they were just three people. Two giants of influence, and one boy with a voice that cut deeper than either had expected. X sat still, his small hands tracing idle patterns in the condensation on his glass. He wasn't speaking to impress. He wasn't speaking to win. He was speaking from somewhere quieter, deeper. His words hung in the air, not loud, but heavy. It's not power, he said quietly. Not money, not even the fight. Trump furrowed his brow, leaning slightly forward. X looked up at him, then at his father. It's the way you change the people closest to you. Trump didn't blink, neither did Musk. The room seemed to pause around them. X's voice was calm, unshaken. But what he had just said hit like a wave. For hours, the conversation had revolved around history, legacy, the weight of a name. But with that one sentence, the boy had flipped the entire discussion upside down. Because what he was saying wasn't about the world. It was about people. And it was personal. Musk's eyes softened. He had built rockets to Mars, revolutionized electric vehicles, reshaped the way humanity thought about the future. But sitting across from his son, he began to wonder, had he changed the people closest to him? Had he really been there for them? Trump, for once, wasn't preparing a response. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't performing. He was thinking. How had he changed the people around him? His children, his supporters, his rivals. Did they feel stronger, wiser, or just used? You say people will remember you because you made them listen, X continued. But what if they remember the anger more than the message? What if they remember the fight, but not why you fought? The air thickened again. Trump let out a slow breath. There were no reporters here, no stage, no crowd to cheer or jeer. Just a boy asking questions no adult had dared ask him, not with that kind of honesty. I don't think you get to choose how history writes you, X said, but you do get to choose how you treat the people who matter. The words weren't grand, they weren't poetic, but they were real. They cut past the headlines, past the monuments and victories. And for a moment, both Trump and Musk were silent. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because they finally understood what needed to be heard. X leaned back, his eyes steady. And if they remember me, he added softly, I want it to be because I changed someone's life, not just the world. And in that quiet, the world outside faded away. Because in that room, legacy had been redefined, not as something you leave behind, but as something you live in the people who truly knew you. The silence in the room had settled like a fog, thick, unmoving, full of weight. Trump sat unusually still, fingers no longer tapping the table. Elon Musk watched him closely, sensing something rare and unfamiliar in the former president's posture. Hesitation. X had just said something that pierced through the bravado, the headlines, and the golden nameplates. Being remembered isn't the same as being understood. It was a simple sentence, barely louder than the whisper of waves outside. But it cracked something open. Trump blinked slowly, as if the words had traveled farther than he expected, past his ears, past the armor of pride, and straight into the one place he rarely let anyone touch, the part of him that still wondered what people really saw when they looked at him. He had spent decades making sure they remembered him. The rallies, the skyscrapers, the victories, the controversies. He'd branded his name onto buildings, golf courses, bottles of water, even steaks. He made sure people couldn't forget him. But had anyone ever really understood him? His expression shifted, not in anger or defense, but something subtler. Vulnerability. The kind you don't show on camera. The kind you don't admit, even to yourself. X wasn't looking to win. He wasn't attacking. His tone was soft, gentle, almost kind. You said they'll remember your name, he continued, but will they know your reasons? Will they know why you did it all? Trump exhaled slowly. The question didn't accuse, it invited, and that's what made it dangerous. Because it was asking him to be seen, not as a figure, not as a symbol, but as a man. Musk leaned back, arms folded, quiet. He too understood the difference. He had often wondered how history would paint him, visionary or villain, disruptor or savior. People could remember you for what you did, but that didn't mean they ever knew who you were. Trump finally broke the silence, voice lower than usual. People don't care about understanding, he said. They just want a story. X didn't flinch. Maybe. But the people closest to you, they want the truth. Trump's eyes met the boys. For a moment, he wasn't a billionaire, a former president, or a brand. He was just a man, aging, uncertain if the world ever truly saw past the noise. That's what scares you, isn't it? X asked gently. Not being forgotten, but being remembered the wrong way. Trump's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. The ocean filled the silence again, steady and eternal. Musk glanced at his son, a quiet admiration in his eyes. The boy had found the softest spot in the hardest man. And Trump, for all his power and pride, was left without a script. Because sometimes the deepest fear isn't to be erased, but to be written wrong. And in that moment, for perhaps the first time in years, Donald Trump wasn't thinking about history. He was thinking about whether anyone ever really knew the man behind the myth. The candles flickered softly, their light casting golden halos across the table's surface. The ocean beyond the windows kept its steady rhythm, crashing and retreating like a breath, indifferent to the weight of the conversation unfolding inside. The night had taken a quiet turn, moving far from talk of politics and power into something far more intimate, something real. Trump sat back in his chair, arms crossed loosely. His usual swagger had faded, not completely, but enough to reveal something beneath it. A man, not the myth. Musk, across from him, leaned forward slightly, sensing what was coming. X, the boy who had unraveled this entire night with nothing more than questions, sat still, watching, waiting. "What are you afraid of?" he had asked. No sarcasm, no accusation. Just a quiet, honest inquiry from a child who wanted to understand. Trump didn't answer right away. He could have dodged it. He had done it 1,000 times before, with reporters, rivals, even friends. He could have laughed it off, made a joke, pointed at the skyline and said, "What's there to be afraid of when your name touches the clouds?" But he didn't. Instead, he stared at the table for a long moment. His fingers tapped once, then stilled. And then he said it. Becoming small. His voice was quiet, quieter than anyone in the room had ever heard it. X didn't respond right away. He just listened, his expression unchanged, but his eyes deeply focused. Trump let the words sit there. He didn't fill the silence. He didn't dress the truth up in metaphor or bravado. He simply was. Raw, exposed, maybe even uncertain. "I've built," he said finally. "I've fought. I've been on the biggest stage in the world. I've had millions chant my name. I've had entire nations love me, hate me, praise me, mock me. But—" He paused, his voice dipping even lower. "When all that fades, what if it never really meant anything?" Musk looked down, rubbing his chin slowly. He understood that question far more than most would guess. He'd built rockets that reached the stars, electric cars that reshaped cities, and neural links that touched the very core of human potential. But in the quiet of his mind, he too had wondered, will it all matter in the end? X sat quietly, his hands folded in front of him, and though he was young, something in his eyes seemed old, wise. He nodded slightly, not in agreement, but in understanding. Trump looked out the window. "I don't like feeling small," he said. "I don't like losing, and I don't like thinking that everything I fought for might just disappear." It wasn't defiance. It was confession. And in that moment, all the walls Trump had built, not the ones of concrete and steel, but of ego and defense, lowered. Just a little. Because for all his might, the real fear was never losing power. It was becoming invisible, insignificant, forgotten. And that perhaps was the most human fear of all. The room had grown quieter as the night deepened, the tide outside crashing with a rhythmic steadiness that contrasted with the turbulence unfolding within. Candles burned lower now, their glow softer, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into the past. Trump had just bared a rare truth. His fear of becoming small. The vulnerability still lingered in the air, unspoken but heavy. Then, with the same calm clarity that had driven the conversation forward all evening, X turned to his father. His voice didn't rise, didn't press. It simply existed, gentle, honest, and impossible to ignore. "Dad," he asked, "what's your biggest regret?" Elon Musk's hand froze mid-motion over his glass. For a man used to rapid thought and confident answers, this one landed like a quiet punch. He didn't look at X immediately. Instead, he let the question echo inside him for a long moment. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about it. He had. In hotel rooms at 3 a.m., in empty boardrooms after another 20-hour day, in the silent moments when the applause faded and the reality of solitude set in. But now, hearing it from his son, with no judgment, just curiosity, was different. "That's a big question," Musk said softly, almost trying to delay. X tilted his head, waiting patiently. Trump, too, leaned in, curious. For all the stage Musk had occupied, conquering space, AI, energy, he rarely spoke of personal things. Tonight was different. Musk set his glass down, slowly. "I think," he began, then stopped, collecting the right words. "I think my biggest regret is how much I've missed." The words were simple, but behind them lived a weight years in the making. "I missed birthdays," he continued, his voice low. "First steps, first words, school plays, late-night talks. I was always somewhere else, building something, fixing something, saving the future." His eyes finally met his son's, and I told myself it was worth it. That one day, when you looked at what I helped build, you'd understand. That you'd be proud. X's face remained unreadable, but his eyes glimmered with something unspoken. Musk looked away, jaw tightening. "But now I wonder if you would have just preferred if I was there." The room was still. Trump sat back slightly, his expression softening. He knew that pain too, the way ambition rewrote time, erasing moments you never got back. Musk exhaled slowly. "I always believed that pushing humanity forward was the noblest thing I could do. But in chasing that, I lost parts of you." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "And that's not a trade I'm sure was worth it." X nodded once, not with judgment, but with understanding. Because he knew. He had felt it in birthdays spent half full, in nights where the stars weren't as bright without his father beside him. For the first time, Elon Musk admitted not just to the cost of genius, but to the price of absence. And in that moment, the man who had conquered planets finally faced the one frontier he couldn't outsmart: the fragile, fleeting heartbeat of time with those he loved. The room remained steeped in quiet after Elon Musk's confession, a silence so full it felt alive. Outside, the ocean whispered in its eternal rhythm, indifferent to the human ache unfolding within these walls. The candlelight flickered gently on Musk's face, highlighting something rare in him: remorse. X didn't speak immediately. He let his father's words settle, allowed the weight of missed birthdays and unsaid goodnights to hang in the air without rushing to fill it. And then, softly but directly, he asked the question that would change everything. So, what are you going to do about it? Musk looked up. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation. An open door to something neither of them had stepped through before. He blinked, as if the question had caught him off guard more than it should have. Elon Musk, the man who had answered inquiries from world leaders, who had explained black holes to billionaires, who had pitched futures that spanned galaxies, found himself for once with no immediate reply. X leaned back slightly in his chair, arms crossed in a mirror of his father's usual stance. There was no smirk, no pressure, just a son asking for a moment of truth. Musk exhaled through his nose, running a hand through his hair. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "Nope," X said with the smallest smile. Trump, watching quietly from the side, chuckled under his breath. "Kid's relentless." Musk looked at his son again, really looked. He didn't see a child anymore. He saw someone who had listened to every word, who had held up a mirror not just to Trump, but now to him. A mirror he could no longer look away from. He leaned forward, rested his elbows on the table, and nodded. "All right," he said. "You win." X raised an eyebrow. "For real?" "For real," Musk confirmed, his voice firmer now. "I'll take a step back. I'll make more time. I won't just build the future. I'll be in it with you." There was something in his voice, something that hadn't been there earlier in the night: conviction. This wasn't a promise made to ease guilt. It was a decision. X nodded slowly, taking it in. But he wasn't done. "You're going to have to delete some emails." Musk groaned dramatically. "Now you're pushing it." Trump laughed. "He's got you, Musk." And for once, Musk didn't mind, because in that moment, surrounded by candlelight and crashing waves, he realized the future wasn't only made of Mars colonies and AI breakthroughs. It was also made of late-night talks, shared meals, and promises kept. This wasn't just a touching moment between father and son. It was a turning point, a quiet vow spoken not on a stage, but across a dinner table. And from that moment forward, Elon Musk wasn't just a man building the future. He was choosing to live in it. The waves rolled outside, steady and unbothered, as if the ocean itself were listening to the quiet storm that had unfolded inside the walls of Mar-a-Lago. The conversation had shifted. Again. Not in volume, but in gravity. It had begun with grand ideas about legacy and politics. But now it felt like something altogether different. Personal, unfiltered, human. Trump leaned back in his chair, watching X with a mixture of surprise and admiration. The boy had asked questions all night, not to provoke, not to impress, but to understand. And in doing so, he had done something that few had managed in years. He had made both Trump and Musk think. Not defend, not debate, not dominate, just think. X, calm as ever, sat with his hands folded in front of him. His face was unreadable, but his presence was undeniable. There was no need for raised voices or clever comebacks. His strength lay in stillness, in the kind of quiet that demanded reflection rather than reaction. Trump smirked and shook his head. "You ask a lot of damn good questions for a kid." X shrugged. "Someone has to." Musk chuckled under his breath, eyes flicking toward his son. He gets it from himself. The air between them lightened, but only slightly. The weight of what had been said, about legacy, about regret, about being understood, still hung there, like the final move in a long game. Trump tapped his fingers against the table, a rhythm of thought. Then he narrowed his eyes at the boy, almost as if he were squaring off with a worthy opponent. "You ever play chess?" X smiled faintly. "Every day." Trump let out a low chuckle. "Me too. Just a different kind." Musk raised an eyebrow. "Yes, but you just lost this round." Trump scoffed, but there was no sting in it. No deflection. Just truth. He looked at X again, the smirk lingering. "Checkmate, huh?" X didn't nod. He didn't gloat. He just let the word hang there, quiet and complete. Checkmate. But it wasn't about winning. Not really. It wasn't a battle of ego. It wasn't about proving who was smarter, who had more power, or who had left a bigger footprint on the world. This wasn't the checkmate of kings and pawns. It was the checkmate of truth. The kind that comes when someone asks you something so honest, so simple, that you can't run from the answer. The kind that doesn't end a game, but begins a reckoning. Trump leaned back, still watching the boy. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't trying to control the narrative. He was simply sitting in it. "You're raising a thinker," he said to Musk. Musk smiled. Wouldn't have it any other way. And neither of them would. Because in that moment, they both understood that the smallest voice at the table had just asked the biggest questions. And sometimes, the greatest power isn't in having the answers, but in having the courage to ask. The night had grown still, the sky outside now velvet black and scattered with stars. The waves continued their endless rhythm, as if echoing the truths spoken inside. The laughter had faded, the debates had quieted, and all that remained was reflection. Trump sat with his arms crossed, not in defiance this time, but in thought. Musk, normally the architect of futures, now seemed anchored in the present. And X, the boy who had asked the hardest questions, simply looked between them, calm, patient, aware. The evening had started with ego, with power, with the language of legacies, but somewhere between the quiet challenges and the open confessions, the conversation had shifted, not toward answers, but toward meaning. Both men had faced things they rarely allowed themselves to feel: fear, regret, uncertainty. They had been forced to see beyond the buildings they built, the titles they held, and the futures they tried to shape. And for once, they weren't being remembered by the world. They were being seen by someone who mattered, and that changed everything. Trump looked at the boy one more time, his face unreadable but no longer guarded. "So you really don't care if the world remembers you?" he asked. X shook his head gently. "Not if the people I love remember me honestly." Trump didn't respond, but the words struck something in him. He had spent a lifetime making the world watch. But now, he was beginning to understand the difference between being noticed and being known. Musk sat quietly, his hand resting on the table near his son's. For all the innovations he had pioneered, for all the ways he had changed the course of civilization, nothing had prepared him for this quiet conversation that had exposed the cost of greatness. He had missed moments, and yet here they were, together. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to make different choices. Because history, as grand as it seems, is a fickle storyteller. It forgets, it revises, it simplifies. It doesn't always tell the truth. But the people who sit across from you at the dinner table, they remember the real story, not the headlines, not the speeches, not the name carved in stone, but the moments of honesty, of presence, of love. Trump looked out at the ocean, then back toward the boy. "Maybe that's what really matters." X nodded. "It is." And for the first time all night, nothing more needed to be said. Because in the end, both giants had come to understand a truth too often buried beneath ambition. You cannot control how history remembers you, but you can choose how you live now. And if the people who truly knew you, your children, your friends, the ones who saw you without the spotlight, remember you with love, with truth, and with peace, then maybe that's the only legacy that truly matters.